Kamal, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
It's a pleasure. Thanks very much. I'm doing very well, even though it has snowed in the UK for people who are from abroad over the last couple of days. And where I am, there's been quite a bit of snow.
Kamal, I was just out. We were doing property viewing actually. We're thinking of moving properties. So I came back and I was freezing and I didn't have the courage to go and get
Yeah,
changed
yeah.
and put in on something smart.
Yeah. No, it's really quite cold. So we're coming into winter pretty
Yes.
solidly.
So Kamal, tell me a bit about yourself. How did an academic like yourself, you're a professor in engineering, how did you end up in politics?
Well, first of all, maybe going back a bit further, I was actually born in Saudi Arabia. My parents are both from Jerusalem. And at the age of 15, they put me on a plane on my own to the UK to go and get an education. And there
Wow.
was nobody here to receive me from family or friends. There was a company that sort of acts as a guardian. So it was quite a shock
Wow.
to come to the UK. And just to illustrate to the listeners, if you want to call someone now, you go on WhatsApp, an immediate call. You don't have to think twice about it. I had to book a call for my parents a week later because you couldn't get it any earlier. So this was in the time when you had to wait until somebody called you, wait a minute, we'll connect you in a minute. So things have moved on tremendously, certainly in communication.
Wow.
And so I went after that so initially it was to do a 3 month language course, but they advised my parents that if I wanted to stay or if they wanted me to stay, I could go to a school. So as a foreign student, of course, I had to find a boarding school because I couldn't go to a state school anyway. So I found one
Yes, sure.
in Staffordshire, and then went on to university to study engineering in Manchester at what was called UMIST, which many people would not know of, which was the University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology. So I studied civil engineering, and then I went to Nottingham University to do my first teaching assignment, and then I came to Birmingham in '89, so it's a long time ago, about 35 years or so, to teach and research in civil engineering. So that was the background, and then I remember uh, probably around the year, when was it, 2003, four, something like that, walking in Birmingham and seeing a Palestinian flag at a store, and I thought, what is this? This is interesting. So I went and talked to them, and it was a representative from the local branch of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. So I talked to them, and I became involved, started to be involved, and then very quickly, most of my free time disappeared because I got. It was around the time as well that the then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon attacked the Palestinian areas that had been handed over after what's called the Oslo Accord, and the viciousness of the Israelis and the fact that they'd reneged on agreements, and looking at the Palestinians and thinking, my God, how can they live with this occupation, got me involved. So that was the start of it, and maybe I'll stop here in terms of how I got
No,
into this.
that's really interesting. So you mentioned that so you saw a Palestinian flag and you realized this Palestinian solidarity campaign. And I understand that you're
Yeah.
now the chair of that, no?
So I was chair. I became a member of the executive in the early 2009, 10, and then I became vice chair. And then the past 5 years, I've been chair of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which is both an honor and a really heavy responsibility. And then I decided not to stand again last February because I decided to stand in the elections for MP in the UK. And
Yes.
at the time, that was due to be around November, around now, in fact. But then Rishi Sunak, the then Prime Minister, called the elections for July. And although I, with a number of friends, were starting to register a new party, it wasn't registered in time, so I had to stand as an independent, as did a couple of my friends and colleagues from Birmingham as well.
Yeah, and your party, you're still in the process of registering it. It's called Reliance, is it?
That's correct. Yeah. So we made an application. Sometimes you have back and forth. It was rejected initially. You need to adjust your constitution. So we did that as the election was being announced. But even though we're now in November, the election was in July. We're still awaiting a decision on its registration. But also thinking about whether it's best to stand as an independent or a number of independent candidates, or to be members of a party, and there are pros and cons to each. So we're just when it's registered, at least we will have that party. We can then either get together again and decide to be members of it and to build it, or to say actually the way forward is to stand as independents. And there's a lot of discussion about this in the UK, not just amongst my immediate friends who are planning to be the members of this party.
That's really interesting. I would like to know more, learn more from you about how can a new party in this current system make a space for itself, and we'll go into that in more detail. But how did you actually end up going into politics to begin with?
Okay, so first of all, uh, being involved in campaigning, being the chair of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, a lot of our work wasn't just about uh, marches and so on. We would lobby MPs, we would try and talk to the government and to the opposition to develop uh, good relations so we can begin to influence, which was a really difficult process here in the UK. The establishment, if you like, in the UK is pro-Israel. So you are not just trying to change the mind of one or two MPs. There's a long-standing commitment, which is really um, un, unhelpful to support Israel, whatever it does, rather than say, hold on a minute, you claim to be a democracy. We support what you do as a democracy. You say in the current situation, you are defending yourselves. Yes, you have the right to do that, but you cannot breach international law. And they don't. Even today in Parliament, as we speak, in the Security Council, there was a resolution calling for an end to the well, at least for a ceasefire. The UK, which is present at the moment, voted for it, but the US vetoed it. Now, in previous resolutions, the UK abstained. So what you try to do, what we were trying to do, is to push them to be more, really more ethical, and to say you cannot see so many people being killed. They cannot be members of a particular organization that's fighting Israel. Surely the children, the women, the old men should not be killed. But with over 40,000 people formally being registered as having passed away because so many of them are still under the rubble, uh, that the UK should change its position. And so that's so I thought when Keir Starmer, so I was chair of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign in October, but Starmer said that uh, the Israel had the right to cut off water and electricity and food from the
I was
Palestinians.
so
And as a
gutted
Palestinian,
and
a
ashamed to
member
hear
of
that.
the party, sorry?
I was saying that when I heard that, I was gutted and I was ashamed and embarrassed that this is what this man is saying, a human rights advocate.
Yes, yes, a human rights lawyer, by the way, not just any person. Uh, and so I thought I can't stay in this party, the Labour Party. I was a member, having heard the leader say this. So I resigned and I put out a public letter, or a letter I made public, letter to him explaining why I had resigned. He had basically refused to meet members of the Palestinian community while meeting members of the Jewish community about Israel. So he should have been talking to the Palestinians about Palestinians, but instead he said no, he wouldn't meet us. And in fact, in his reply to my letter resigning, whoever drafted it on his behalf, because I'm sure he didn't sit down on his own and write it, actually said that, Keir Starmer had met members of a synagogue and had met human rights organizations about Palestine, not Palestinians. Notice the difference. So he knew. I guess it was clear to him that he would be shamed if he met the Palestinian community about his stance. But at least he should listen. There are lots of families in the UK who've lost loved ones. They will only talk about any British people who were hostages or any who've lost their lives. And they don't stop Israeli or dual nationals, British Israeli nationals, from going to serve in the army. So I thought, okay, we've been on the marches. More than 1 million were out on one. We've had about 23 even now, with hundreds of thousands of people marching, but the government hasn't changed its mind. Maybe the thing to do is to try and stand for parliament. And if elected, I could look him in the eye, or Sunak, whoever won at the time, and actually call them out for their hypocrisy, and demand that if they believe in international law, then they must stand with the victims, the civilians in Palestine, not with the country that breaches human rights every day. And also the hypocrisy of saying that they stand with Ukraine because it's occupied, but they stand with Israel, which occupies another people. The clearest hypocrisy you can see. So
It's
that was
shameful.
really the background as to why I decided to stand. Yeah.
So, so when you do decide to stand and go into politics, um, just because from an outsider's point of view, I'm just trying to understand, like, um, did you consider joining some of the existing parties, or why did you choose to have your own new platform? Um, we're talking about, like, I
Yeah.
don't know, Green Party, but also like smaller parties, even like what George Galloway is doing or others. Did you consider those?
Yeah. Yeah. So the way it happened was that after I had a call from some people who are now friends, after they saw my letter of resignation, who happened to be of a Muslim background. And they said, we're thinking of launching a new party. I would like you to be involved if you're interested. So I met them and we looked at the situation. None of the other parties were really solidly behind the Palestinian people. Yes, they have policies, two-state solution, this, that, and the other, including the Greens. Uh, George Galloway at the time, I'm just trying to, had just won in Rochdale. Oh, sorry, no, this was before he stood in Rochdale. So he was, of course, he's a known person, but he hadn't declared he would be standing as a party. And in fact, if you recall, when he stood in Rochdale, I don't think anyone knew he was standing as a party leader, but as George Galloway. Uh, so again, we thought between us, let's shape this party. Uh, let's make sure that it's a party where there is no whip, and that's sometimes a difficult concept to explain to people, particularly from abroad. But in the UK, basically, the whip means you do as the party decides. So if there's a vote on something, the whip means that you will be told which way to vote for or against a particular resolution or motion. But we thought, no, what we want is people to come who share values. They may vote in the same way on something, but it could be the case that they may decide to vote differently and they wouldn't be persecuted for it. So you're aware, I'm sure, that some of the Labour Party MPs who were elected in July have had this whip drawn from them. So they can't call themselves Labour MPs
Yes.
because they stood, for, I think it was this time about the winter fuel allowance or some uh, other aspect, not Palestine. So this party would not be, you wouldn't be tied to it. The process of becoming a candidate, it would be easier, would be focused in England first and then hopefully expand. And there would be quite a nucleus here in the Midlands where the whole idea started. So we didn't think I didn't think I could go to be with the Conservatives. I just left Labour. The Liberal Democrats, I've not always agreed with their policies. The Greens were close, so I might have gone with them, but I'm not sure how quickly I would have been allowed to be a candidate, because there would be a selection process and I don't know what would have happened. Whereas here we were in charge, and so we were going to stand a number of people under the name of that party. So that was the reason for thinking about standing as a party. But then, as I say, when Sunak announced the election in July, we hadn't been registered. We couldn't name ourselves standing in the name of the party. So what happens in the UK is, on the ballot paper, if you stand as an independent, there's a blank for the symbol or the logo, because you're not a member of a party, whereas people would recognize the Labour uh, Conservative logos. So even if they didn't know, and that was quite an interesting thing, even if they didn't know who the candidate was or much about them, they wanted to vote Labour or Conservative, they'd see the logo and put the cross there.
Very true. So, how did you find the support generally, regardless of what the results were for the election? How do you see the support, current ongoing support for the work you're doing? How is it being received on the streets in Birmingham?
Yeah, I mean, what happened, in fact, when the election date was announced, quite literally, I was, because we were banking on November, there was plenty of time to build a team and so on. But I remember sitting there and thinking, how am I going to do this? At the moment, I'm on my own, which was the starting point. But there was a group here in Birmingham called Selio Palestine Solidarity, who had been holding protests against the MP in the area I decided to stand in, because he was the chair of Labour Friends of Israel. His name is Steve McCabe.
Yes.
So the area was Birmingham, Seliouk, and he was the MP. So they'd held protests, and actually I'd gone and spoken at these protests before I stood for Parliament, because I was asked as a former chair of PSC and a Palestinian if I would speak, and that's what happened. But then, because that's the other question, okay, whether independent or party, which constituency would you stand in? There are 650. So I chose Seliouk to stand against this local MP, and that constituency is actually the neighbouring constituency to where I live. So I wasn't going to another city like Galloway did, for example, to Rochdale. So that was the choice. But after I sat and wondered, this group, which is called SOP, Seliouk Palestine Solidarity, invited me to speak to them, and they asked me if I would stand for Parliament, and that then there was a process of deciding to support me. So I immediately had a pool of people who would be helping. But very quickly, I had almost 150 people on a WhatsApp group who were supportive. I had 3 campaign managers who were local Muslim ladies, which was amazing, and others who helped. And they were experienced in campaigning from previous years, so they knew how to start campaigns and to develop them. But if you like, the handicap was being independent, because one, you don't have a database in your area which tells you how certain houses have voted. So you don't know, if you want to target Labour voters or Conservative voters, you didn't know where they were. So when you knocked on a door, you had no idea who'd come out. You might get a Reform voter, and we did get some. So the campaigning was limited in that sense, and right from the outset, as an independent, you're only allowed to spend a sum of money of £17,000, which might seem like a lot. Had this been a long campaign, it wouldn't have been a lot. But actually, we didn't spend that much in the month, because we only had a month. So the issue of funding, whereas the parties obviously have an infrastructure. So they are spending more than that amount of money in reality. But despite that, um, the message we took to the voters, which was not just about Palestine, and I should add that the day before nominations in the Labour Party ended for the next MP, so that Steve McCabe, who was due to be the next candidate, he decided to stand down. Okay, so in a way that was a win that he had to stand down. That was good. However, what the Labour Party did was to parachute in a candidate who was completely unknown in the area, didn't live in the area, hadn't had any experience in politics. He was a former army colonel in Afghanistan who sort of resigned from the army a few weeks before this. Clearly, they'd already been working on a number because they had the Keir Starmer stood and had a picture taken with, I think it was 7 former army people he had given sort of seats to stand in, including this guy who he had been parachuted in, who, if you Google his name is Alistair Carnes, and you will not find anything except that he won bravery awards in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I think people would wonder what you would win bravery awards in these countries for, but not declare what that was. Okay, so people immediately, we know how many atrocities were committed in these countries. And obviously, I can't accuse him personally of any of these because we don't know what he did, but that's the background. So someone unconnected to the area was parachuted in, had all the support from the Labour Party, whose logo obviously would be on the ballot paper, who had many tens of thousands of phone numbers to text and encourage people to come out. So that puts you in in a challenging position to beat that person. But we continued. On the doorsteps, the people said the following: generally, we don't want the Conservatives, so we're going to vote Labour because we think they can get rid of them. When you ask some of them, do you know who the local who your MP is? They didn't. If they did, do you know who the candidate is? They didn't. So this is something to think about regarding the UK democracy, that people generally vote for the party, not for the candidate. And therefore, so he won with a a reduced majority for the seat, but he received something like 17,000 votes and I received 2,800, which is a respectable result in the sense that, I was an unknown to the area and an independent. But really, I stood to hopefully win and do what I said to you a few minutes ago, to be in Parliament, look people in the eye and call them out when they didn't do the right thing on lots of policies, not just Palestine, but we've noticed in the last few weeks how many policies Labour reneged on or introduced without having mentioned them in the lead up to the election. And the key thing that I felt people wanted, they wanted representation. So what they didn't want was somebody who would represent the party to them rather than represent them in Parliament. And this is what happens now. It is very much now about which way to vote, which is not necessarily what the people, the person represents want.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the system is so badly broken, and everyone understands it's broken, but the status quo is such that even when Labour Party is not in power, they're thinking the system needs to be changed. But as soon as they get in power, no one wants to change anything because now all of a sudden it suits them. But I think it's an ideal opportunity, not just for yourself, but all these other independent candidates of conscience, smaller parties, regardless of what their views are. I think it's at some stage, um, this system is doomed to fail.
But as you said, Tafhim, I think one of the problems is that the party that gets in under the first past the post system, as they call it, thinks, why should we change the system? So they're not thinking this is a broken system. Now Labour has a huge majority and can bring in everything it wants to do. It would be really unusual for its own people not to vote, particularly with the whip behind the leadership. So Labour can do effectively anything they want. And in the previous parliament, Boris Johnson had a huge majority. And again, he could do whatever he wanted. So why would you then think, oh, on principle, we think representation is important, and therefore we're going to change to proportional representation? That's the sad thing. And I did tell people when I stood that if we didn't get many independents in this time, the system will be the same for the next 50 years. And I fear
Yes.
that that might be the case. But there were positives because there were 4 independent candidates who won, plus Jeremy Corbyn, who stood in his own area as an independent. But I take him out because he's a special case. He's not an unknown who stood. So there are 5 people, and I've seen the work they're doing, which is excellent. Calling the government out. At the moment, they're calling Keir Starmer and the Foreign Secretary out on the issue of what is genocide. So the latest letter that went from the 5, the independent coalition, I think it is, to Starmer was to say, can you tell us your definition of genocide in relation to Palestine, to Gaza? Because you said that you don't consider that Israel is committing genocide. So what is your definition? Because the definition the International Criminal Court uses is actually one which would put Israeli leaders in a really difficult position because it would amount to genocide, what they have been doing for the last 13 months.
There was a lot of people who left the Labour Party under Starmer. I think there was. Do you know the numbers? Was it like more than 100 or something?
You mean MPs or members?
I think altogether, MPs. There was
Well,
some
members, yeah,
councillors.
yeah. No, so there were MPs who switched. There were councillors who switched, but then lots of members of the Labour Party who had come in when
Yes.
Jeremy Corbyn was elected left. I haven't seen the figures, but if I remember rightly, more than 100,000 have gone. Then obviously they're ones who support the party financially.
So I'm thinking,
But they gave a message.
how can you kind of unite those into some, like, even especially the MPs and the councillors that have left, the people who are actively engaged
Yeah.
in politics? Where have they gone?
Yeah.
Is it the case most of them have gone to Lib Dems, or how can we unite them into a single purpose?
Yeah. So there were calls after the election for Jeremy Corbyn to establish a party. And if he did, and even if he does now, that party might draw some of these people in, both those who were officials and those who were ordinary members who left. And there are moves, there are discussions about a party. Not that Jeremy would lead it. We don't know. He hasn't indicated. But there are discussions happening about some sort of a party on the left to which a lot of these people would go. And as I said to you, if once we get Reliance established as a party, with the electoral commission, then that would be an opportunity to sit with these same people and see what we do. We've got in many councils elections next year, and in others elections 2026. Then there are mayoral elections. I think it's 2027, and then a year later it's the next general election. So it isn't that those of us who are thinking about it are not doing anything,
Yes.
but deciding what the right party would be, if it's a party. But also, don't forget that for independence, what brought these 4 into parliament was Gaza. They stood specifically on the Gaza issue. Now, in 5 years' time, we don't know what the main issue is likely to be, or whether it could be as drawing as Gaza was. Certainly in the communities or in the constituencies where there were large numbers of Muslims, it was a really important feature. As it happened, actually, the Sunny Oak area I stood, there were Muslims, but not in the numbers that could swing a vote. But Ayub Khan MP here in Birmingham won in an area where there was another Muslim MP before him. So that was it was important in that respect. So I think there's still a lot of thinking about the best way forward, but there are discussions. I was at a meeting only a week ago on the same issue to see if a party could be formed on the left, and how it might, when it would be launched, and how, and so on.
And before we go and talk about what's happening in Gaza, what did you think about these recent riots that took place with anti-immigration, anti-Muslim across the country? How did you see those?
Well, I mean, look, when I came to the UK in 1977, I felt it was a very tolerant place. I don't remember having. I might have had one encounter that was a racist encounter, but generally there wasn't. It was a tolerant place. There's no doubt that, particularly with Nigel Farage and the push for Brexit, the emphasis on immigration as a problem, that has become an issue of divisiveness. So it has divided the country. There is misinformation, uh, but also there are real concerns that people have about the level of immigration, which some feel is too much. They don't immediately think of the contribution that immigrants meet, or that many Brits live abroad. Why is it that they should be accepted in the countries that they go to work and live, but immigrants should be accepted here? They will then say, oh, no, 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 what we mean is illegal immigration, the boats, and so on. So all of that was the background, I think, to these riots that happened. So there's been a rise in the sort of anti-immigrant uh, feeling in the country. Allied to it, and that's the thing that is worrisome for Muslims, is a feeling that the problems that come with immigration are from the Muslim community. I mean, even I think it was a couple of days ago, I saw Nigel Farage talk about, think of the situation in 2050. And by that, he means there'll be so many Muslims here. What will the country be like? So that's the underlying sort of incitement, almost, to say we don't want that. Well, if you don't want the natural growth of this community by 2050 to happen, what do you want? Do you want to throw people out of the country, take their
Yeah.
citizenship away? So that was the background, I think. And then you had Tommy Robinson, Lennon, Naxley Lennon, or whatever, holding these marches in London again. They were all about inciting. It was always interesting to see people say, "I'm not racist, but," and what came after the "but" was racist.
Yes.
And you think, don't think like that. When you go home now, when you go to the NHS to a doctor, the likelihood is you will see a member of the team, if not many members of the team, who are not originally white English people. And I say English, not even Scottish or Welsh or whatever. So the, so that's, I think, what led to these riots. The incident itself in Southport was terrible, was awful, and the person who committed that atrocity should be taken through the courts and be held responsible, and so on. But the attacks or the push towards mosques, because
Yeah,
somebody thought he was a Muslim were deliberate because
that was an
they
organized
almost
thing. Yeah,
hoped that it would be. Yeah, but this is where I commend the Labour government on the way it dealt with these, because it quickly dealt with them, and the message was: yes, you can protest, but you do not commit violence, and you do not target communities. Things are a bit calmer for now, but things are bubbling under the surface, as I say, because people like Farage are still saying, without an immediate threat, just think what we're going to be like in 2050, as if it's going to
yeah.
be an intolerable place where, all the white people would leave.
I think the irony
What's going to
is,
happen?
the irony in this whole thing is that it's the areas that are less diverse that have more fear, and the diverse areas are the ones that are happy to see a more diverse community because we learn from each other. We kind of, I think, we become a better society because there's power in diversity.
Yeah, but even in the areas you think are, less diverse, I don't want to just focus on food, but when they want to take away, what do they get? They don't get,
Yeah.
what do they get? Steak and kidney pie? Some might, but most will go for a Chinese or for an Indian or for a Lebanese. And the people there are immigrants, and they've got businesses, and they're doing well, and doing doing a service. So I think education is important, but what you worry about is the deep down sort of resistance to the other. And that's the problem when they become the other, even if they've got a British
Yes.
passport like you and they were born here. And even though the same people you mentioned in these areas might cheer a black player playing for England because they've scored, they don't say, oh, no, we don't want any of them there, because what they want is a winning team. Uh, and, France, for example, when they won the World Cup, how many black players did they have in the team? Quite a number, or almost all of them, but it wasn't all of them. And yes, it is the positive things that immigrants bring, but let's be clear from our side, and I call that us, who certainly I wasn't born here, but I've been here a long time, and I have integrated into the society here. I'm not sort of out of, and that's the other thing. I wouldn't stand for parliament just to represent my
Sure.
people. It's to represent everyone. And we need to look at, are we living in isolation in some communities? Are we only passing on our culture to our children? People might say to me, how dare you say that? Yes, we are. But really, we are not in our home countries, or the countries we came from. And just like you should respect, we as Muslims respect Afro-Caribbeans and Chinese people and white people, there are things that hold us together, and we all hold a British passport, and that's quite important. So I think there's something that our community leaders need to be doing to make sure that we there's an integration that is greater than it is now, but without losing the identity. As I say, nobody should feel that they must stop eating their curries and only eat fish and chips and pie and chips and beans on toast. Nobody's asking for that. But, when our children go to school, some of the food offered, and we have focused on food, will be typical British food, or food that British families English families might consume even. So I think it is two ways. I don't accept that it's just a problem with the far right. If we're trying to learn from each other and find, not just coexistence, because we are members of the same country, but actually a good position of living together, and helping each other.
Let me just take a moment's break to introduce our sponsors for today. This episode is proudly being sponsored by the Worldwide Listings Company Limited, or WLC for short. WLC is a e-commerce marketing agency specializing in making brands successful on Amazon. So if you are thinking of starting a new venture, or if you already have a brand and you want to take it to that next level, then get in touch and WLC will be able to help. For transparency purposes, let me also tell you that WLC is actually a company that I founded and am the director of. When you get in touch with WLT, you'll be getting in touch with me and my team, and we look forward to greeting you and seeing how we can help. Thank you, and now let's get back to the episode. Last week, I was interviewing on this platform one of my previous professors, actually from Birkbeck College, University of London, who is a professor on nationalism, ethnicity, but also demography. And this is what we were talking about, how almost every country in Europe has a declining population. So you need like 2.1 children per couple to sustain the society. And lots of countries, every European country is well below that level. So we've only really, learning from like what he was saying, we've only got two options. We either get immigration, get people in to replace the people who are now elderly and cannot work and contribute to the economy, or we shrink our society, which means that then there will be a smaller group of people, young people, supporting a larger group of elderly people to sustain them. And either option, there's no saying which option we want to take. Maybe there needs to be more debate about that, but neither option is going to mean community can go on as it was in the past. So there is change coming up. We need to decide what change we need and which direction we want to go into.
Yes, and Brexit was quite a telling point in time, because when people feel they are not welcome in a country and they have a country to go back to, or they could take their skills elsewhere, they will. And that's what happened. Uh, Many industries have a shortage of the skills that they need, and particularly the NHS. We had people from all over the world, but particularly from Eastern Europe and so on, who decided, "I don't want to be here." And why would you want to be in a country where you're not welcome? You know that. But on the issue of yes, I mean the key point in relation to what you said about your discussion is the aging population. Now, if it is a shrinking population, the young people would be taxed more, would be expected to work for longer. So they may decide to go to other countries where that is not the case. And then you could get to a critical point where you just don't have enough resources to look after the elderly, who will tell you point blank, I worked all my life, I paid all my taxes, and when I needed them, the support, it wasn't there. So there's been talk about Labour, for example. uh, the state pension in the UK, the age has been rising and it's gone up from 60 for women. Now it's coming up to 66, I think, and in a couple of years it'll be 67. Uh, that's not the highest. I think in Norway, I learned it was 70. So, people, as I say, are already having to work longer. But that Labour were thinking that if you have got a good private pension, you don't need your public pension. But people had planned their retirement based on having both, because they
Yes.
chose not to put money into to put more money into the private pension, and that combined with the national pension, if you like, would give them a comfortable retirement, not a brilliant one, but for most people anyway. So I think we do need to think about the way forward, but the worst thing is for people to feel either unwelcome or so heavily taxed that they will want to look elsewhere. And they can quickly tell you, if I go to Dubai, I'm going to be paying no tax. I could be able to afford to send my children to schools in that country or that emirate, and so on. And I will live well. There's a good health service, etc. So that's the danger of driving. Sometimes people talk about governments driving businesses away, but you can also drive people away, not just who are the massive earners, but people with skills like doctors and engineers and so on.
It's very true. Even nurses, so many people are leaving to go to Australia and New Zealand. And that's a good point, actually. So if we decide that we want to just shrink the community rather than have immigration, then what's to say that those younger people will stay here? Why would they not leave? Because they can compare wages for wages.
Yeah, yeah. No, no. I think that's absolutely right. Yeah.
Earlier, so looking into what's happening in Israel, in Palestine, what Israel is doing. Um, Earlier, you talked about 40,000 people have lost their lives, and I see that number kind of circulating a lot. And I have no idea where that number is coming from because that number has been circulating for a long, long time now, and it seems not to be changing. And I have no idea in all of this disastrous situation that's going on, how anyone can estimate how many people have actually lost their lives. So my idea is, and I wanted to know your thoughts, that the real number is likely to be a whole lot larger. And the other day, second part of the question, the other day I was reading in The Guardian that estimates are that about 70% of those people who have lost their lives were women and children.
First of all, the official figures come from the Ministry of Health in Gaza. So that's what the Israelis immediately say. You should say it's the Hamas Ministry of Health in Gaza. Yes, it is the health, but uh, those are documented, named people, ID numbers, and so on. The problem, when you look at the devastation of Gaza, is the unknown number of people who are still lying under the rubble, or that Israel abducted to interrogate and torture and so on, who have been buried possibly in mass graves. Sometimes when they return them, the bodies have, decayed so much it's difficult to identify them. So I agree. I think the numbers are going to be much worse than that. So although the Israelis criticize this number and say they don't accept this number, I think it's only to throw, because they always have to throw doubt into anything. They will
Yeah.
say that, but they know deep down that the number is going to be larger than that. I mean, the Lancet, I think, predicted that the number would be closer to 200,000 dead. If you then add the number who've been injured, you're approaching the sort of 500,000. Now, there are 2 million people in Gaza. So basically, a quarter of the people have either been injured or have been killed. That's what could transpire at the end. 40,000 is too many anyway. So we're not playing with figures and inflating them, but that's what the situation could end up as. And when you look at how many children have been killed, approaching 20,000, maybe, but in addition to that, there are, I think, nearly 20,000 orphan children. I mean, think of the conditions they are living in. And in many cases, they haven't just lost mum and dad, they've lost their whole family. Uh, I don't know how they're looking after them. I haven't seen a report, and maybe that's needed to show the kind of support that they are getting. But there's no food. If they're babies, I think there are something like 800 children who have been killed who are under 1 year old, i.e., they were born and died under this. And I'll never forget the story about a man who had gone to register his child, his baby, and when he came back, he found that he'd been killed. I mean, these are atrocious things, and they are being done by Israel. Let's be absolutely clear. The, with its partner, America. And I say partner. I don't say support. No, no. It is a complete partner in the killing, and we should be as angry with the United States as we are with Israel, because it supplies it with the devastating weaponry, but also with any additional military expertise it needs. Secretaries of State for Defense and if you like, the foreign secretary, are they regularly sitting within the war cabinets? They know exactly what is happening, and they are consulted because Israel still doesn't want to do something that will upset the Americans, but they do, and then say what they uh, bank on is that the, they will then say to the Americans, "You see, we were right to do that." Okay, killing Nasrallah, killing Ismail Haniyeh, going into Rafah, which America said they shouldn't do. They have gone in and they've devastated it. So I think the figures are only an element of they have destroyed the culture, they've destroyed the homes, they've destroyed the hospitals, etc. Which means these people now, not only are they hungry and they're being moved from one place to another, once this ends, when it ends, there will be nothing to go back to. So what happens then? They can't rebuild in days or months. So what will they do? Or what will the international community that allowed this to happen do to help the Palestinians?
Very true. And yeah, I often think about that, and it's just so sad to see. At some stage, this devastation is going to stop, but life's not going to go back to normal for the Palestinians for generations at this rate. Um,
That's right.
can so Israel's been taken to ICJ, ICC. There's arrest warrants out for people like Netanyahu. In your opinion, has has this made any change of tactics or change of strategy for Israel on the ground? And secondly, has it made any change for the European countries, including UK, in our support for Israel?
So just a minor correction. The arrest warrants have been requested by
Ah,
the chief prosecutor, but the decision as to whether to issue them is back with the court, and they've been prevaricating for a long time. But tied to that is the fact that particularly the Americans say they don't recognize the ICC. It has no role in this. If they call, if they do issue these warrants for the arrest of Israeli leaders, then they will have their assets in the US frozen. In other words, they almost will criminalize the judges who are doing their job to bring criminals in front of the court. Uh, and the UK is no better. Boris Johnson, when he was prime minister, had a request to, even before all this started, a request from the conservative Friends of Israel to say that the UK would not support the ICC bringing Israeli leaders to the court. And he issued that letter. So there's a public letter from a British Prime Minister which says the UK would not support this. And he gave two reasons. One was that Palestine wasn't a state, and that Israel was not a member of the ICC. Therefore, there's no jurisdiction. But remember that on the books here since 2012, I believe, there's been a resolution that was passed in the British Parliament calling on the government, whichever one it is, to recognize Palestine. So that should have, he should have said, we recognize Palestine, we're against this, but no. And even now, there are still calls, and they happen. If Jeremy Corbyn had won with Labour to be the next government, then a recognition of Palestine would have been
yes.
automatic almost, or very, very. Whereas this government will prevaricate, and it will say when it is appropriate. And who do they speak to? Hamas is still in charge in Gaza, and they will always find a way to ensure that they give Israel what it wants, basically, which it says, and it has said it now clearly, there would be no Palestinian state. Okay, so you are saying there'll be no two-state solution. How about one state? Oh, no, 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 no. We can't have that and give people equal rights because then the prime minister might be a Palestinian. Great. Maybe they would do a
Yes.
good job for both, not just for
Yeah.
the Palestinians. So I think we're heading to a point where the only way, apart from continuing to press our government here, is to really hike up the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, because that is undoubtedly hurting companies that are complicit, but also hurting Israel. And I think that will continue after this war stops, because people will
Yes.
not quickly forget the 40,000 or 200,000 that have been killed.
And from the position you're in, you see that campaign is having a definite impact on Israel, is it? The boycott campaign.
It's have an impact on Israel and on international companies complicit in this. So,
Yeah.
for example, McDonald's, which was not originally a real target, in many countries, people are not going to McDonald's, and they're having to try and show that they are not really with, suppose of Israel. I mean, the reason McDonald's was picked on is because the McDonald's in Israel decided to give free meals to the IDF. So, that was a clear uh, uh, position they took, which was unacceptable,
Yes.
abhorrent.
Yeah.
Why are you doing that? So, first of all, there are 200 companies anyway on a list produced by the Human Rights Commission, which should be boycotted. We shouldn't, in this country, have our pensions, particularly local authority pensions, investing in companies that are complicit in the occupation. And also, when the Conservatives were in power, they were planning to bring in a law to criminalize, basically, to stop people boycotting Israel. Well, they've gone without passing that resolution, so we haven't heard that Labour want to do anything like that. So, you look for peaceful things. What can we do? We can do peaceful things from where we are. And I think the BDS is the best strategy. Marching, important. There's a march coming up end of next week, I believe, and then writing to your MP. The Palestine Solidarity Campaign is holding a lobby of Parliament on the 27th. I believe it is next week, next Wednesday. So that is when every person can write to their MP and say, I want to see you in Parliament. And if they don't reply, you go to Parliament, and there's a process by which you send them a card to say, I'm here and I want to see you. So people should continue to do that. So boycott as individual. Divestment is happening. Some pension schemes in Norway and other places are withdrawing their money. And then sanctions. And some countries are beginning to talk about sanctions. And including, you asked about Europe. Well, the European Union, if you like, foreign minister is arguing now that they should look at cooperation on a political level with Israel. So there is something called the EU-Israel association agreement, basically a trade agreement. And the second paragraph talks about respect for human rights. So how can you continue to have normal relations with Israel when it disrespects human rights? That's what should be apparent very quickly. The problem with the EU is there are 27 countries, and you've got to have them all agree on this. And there are
Yes.
countries that are supportive of Israel who are not going to agree to that. But what I feel, and this is really the problem, the world, and I mean the leaderships, have lost any sense of humanity. Because if you have any sense of humanity in you, you can't accept seeing what we see in Gaza by a state that is now a rogue state, that is doing what it wants. It hasn't implemented a single United Nations resolution. It has not adhered to the Geneva Convention, international humanitarian law. And you support it? Why are you doing that? When in fact, and this is, if it weren't so serious, it would be laughable. With Lebanon, Israel has asked for the implementation of Resolution 1701 instead of implementing the resolutions it should be implementing itself, like 2334, which was about the settlements, that they are illegal. They shouldn't exist as they are. So we need to keep pushing on all these fronts because our governments are not changing their position. They're not even recognizing the genocide they see on the TV screens every day.
It's true. It's such hypocrisy. I don't understand how our government wants to go and lecture China and other countries on human rights when this is the record that we have in front of the whole world, telecasted on TV, on all social media. How can they even wake up in the morning and face the public?
Not only that, but I mean, look, a really good comparison is Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine. Now, over the last couple of days, America has allowed Ukraine, because it's occupied, to fire rockets into Russia, deep into Russia. But the Palestinians can't do that, okay?
Yeah,
And they say they're targeting civilians. The weapons the Palestinians have can't target anything. They're not as sophisticated as the ones Israel has, which if it used as it claims in precision bombing, we wouldn't have so many people being killed.
yeah,
So I only yesterday tweeted, David Lammy put out a tweet about Russia and Ukraine. And I said, if you replace Russia with Israel, Ukraine with Palestine, the same tweet would work. Because actually, if you put Israel alongside Russia as the occupier, that's the correct position. Not Israel against Ukraine, because Ukraine is being occupied. And that's the hypocrisy that people can't understand. Why is there a law for everyone but a
yeah.
different law for Israel? So it
It's very
always
true.
claims it is taken exceptionally, treated exceptionally, but really, yes, it is treated exceptionally by being allowed to do by the powers that be what it wants to do, and to lie and to say things that like on the first day, on the 7th of October, when atrocities were committed, undoubtedly focus on them, but to claim as a lie that 40 babies had been decapitated, and the number of rapes they talk about, which have been disputed by Israeli sources, not by Palestinians, the lies that justify what it's doing on a daily basis are horrendous. The other thing that really troubles me is at the beginning or before that, people would always criticize the Israeli government and would say, no, 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 but they're the government. If they had a different government, things would be better. But it's Israeli society now that has not demonstrated once to ask its leaders to end this carnage, this killing, this barbarism, and it sends its
Yes.
sons and daughters to do the killing. So it's no longer just the
It's not.
current government with Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who are nutcases. It is Israeli society which will not put a stop to it itself. It shouldn't need the Americans to tell the Israeli leadership to change. They should be out on the streets, all of them, calling for an end to the carnage and for the release of the hostages. But they only care about the hostages.
It's very true. And our politicians seem to think they don't need to address these things because it's a Muslim issue or something, whereas they don't realize this is not just a Muslim issue. This is an issue that is troubling people across the globe. In all countries, there's decent people um, protesting on all different platforms, different ways, different methods, and this isn't going to go away. Even if the war stops, this what these governments are doing is going to haunt them for generations.
Unfortunately, I agree with you. I mean, I know that when I was involved heavily in, if you like, in the leadership of the PSC and so on, and we would be at the front of the march, and therefore I didn't talk to many people behind us, and then we went to speeches and so on. But since then, when I've been amongst people, all sorts of religions and none, different countries who are absolutely appalled. The same kind of demonstration happening even in Germany with all the oppression they get there, in France, in America, on campuses in America, campuses in the UK. It was people from different backgrounds. So you're absolutely right. They try to portray it as a Muslim issue, but it isn't only a Muslim issue. There's no doubt that Muslims care deeply about Al-Aqsa Mosque and about the Palestinian people and so on. But they come at it from the point of view of human rights. Why is it that a country can occupy another people's land and treat them in the most abominable way and get away with it? Why is it that they only bring to the ICC African leaders, and if they could, it would be Putin, but not Netanyahu? The same should be applied to everyone, and then we would be in a better place as a society and an international community if we treated everyone in the same way.
Yeah. Kamal, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. It's almost past 8 p.m. now. Before you go, I've got a couple of last questions for you, if you may. Firstly, you have contacts in Palestine. Do they realize the support that they have if across the globe, the protests, the movements that are going on, and what do they think about this? Obviously,
They
at the
certainly
same
do.
time,
Yeah.
obviously they have so many immediate problems to worry about that they can't really presumably sit and think about these things, but global politics right now. But from what you understand, do they realize the goodwill people have towards them?
I mean, even before the start of this round from the 7th of October, uh, I was many years ago the chair of the British Palestine Twinning Network. So cities and towns and villages in the UK were twinning with Palestinian cities, towns, and villages. And they used to see the protests before the huge ones that we have had. So they know. They are always asking the question, why then don't these governments cut relations with Israel? And really, how can we in the UK have an ambassador of Israel here who doesn't recognize Palestinian rights, is against a two-state solution, and was the minister of the settlements before she came here? So, people see the contrasting positions of people and governments, and that's replicated elsewhere. So, yes, they do. And there's no doubt I was not just in Palestine, I was in Jordan last year after this started, and people were saying, "How did you get so many people out?" And I said, "We organized. Yes, we organized, but we didn't tell people to come out. They came from all over the country to London, and people were falling over each other, politicians and others, to speak from the platform, to portray their support for the Palestinian people." So I think people, not I think, I know they know that the people are with them, but they cannot understand how the leaderships can support this state that has gone beyond anything you can describe as human. Indeed, it should be boycotted, it should be divested from, and it should be sanctioned by the international community, just like they've done with Russia. We're not asking for special treatment for Israel here.
It is hard to explain why we make the decisions we make, our government, when we claim that we're a democracy. It's hard to then translate that to people watching from outside, to explain to them what we're doing and justify it. Lastly, Kamal, so are you originally, your family, are they from Jerusalem? Where are they from?
So both of my parents are from Jerusalem. They were born in Jerusalem before 1948, before Israel was created. And this illustrates the Palestinian issue. They happened to be outside Palestine in 1967, and so they lost the right to return home. And I did. I was only able to go to Palestine when I got a British passport, and I felt comfortable going after the Oslo Accords, when, including myself, initially thought this is a good development because we want a peaceful solution. And I cannot tell you the emotions when I went the first time in '96, I think it was, from the Allenby Bridge from Jordan, and you go across the bridge and you see the Israeli flags. You do the processing of the passports, and then you suddenly see the Palestinian flags on Palestinian land. And I remember my wife and I at the time, we just burst into tears because it was so symbolic.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, now that Palestinian flag is being banned in a number of countries, or you're not allowed to wear it. Uh, it hasn't changed. It's the flag of peace, unlike the Israeli flag, which is the flag of war and apartheid and racism and criminality. That's what it is.
When you sit and think about Jerusalem, what's the thing that you miss most when you're not there? About
Going into the old city, which is a fantastic atmosphere, and all the shops in the old city, when you go in from the Damascus Gate, are Palestinian owned. The Israelis are trying to find ways of getting them out, also taking houses inside. And then when you go into Al Aqsa Mosque, is another moment when you look around and you think, my God, this should not be in their hands. The
yeah,
last year, so I was, I married a lady from the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem about 14 years ago, and I used to go regularly. But then in 2007, the Israelis denied me entry and sent me back from the airport there to the UK, and so I wasn't able to go back. But in August 2023, I was in Jordan on some business, and I decided to try my luck. So I went down to the bridge, and I was allowed in, and it was a Thursday night. And on Friday, I managed to go to the Friday prayers at Al Aqsa Mosque, which was
wow.
just so emotional, really was. And you looked around, and they thought, this is not their place. Christians pray in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which I've been to, and it's an amazing church. The Wailing Wall or the Western Wall, I haven't been to, but I've seen it close by, where Jews go and pray, and Muslims pray at Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's the way it should be. There should be
Yeah,
no question. We should all be able to visit each other's areas, but not to pray there, just to claim them. And that's what they try and do. So it is really that moment of seeing Al-Aqsa Mosque, and in particular the Dome of the Rock. When I go up the first minutes in Jerusalem, up towards the Mount of Olives, because obviously it's a mount, to my right, suddenly you see that the Dome of the Rock, and it's amazing. The feeling for me is always just so emotional.
I can picture it and I can just imagine it. Kamal, thank you so much. I really appreciate your input, your time. Um, Before we go, kindly, even after this call, do share your. I've got your website, social media handles, anything I can put in the notes. Before this session, I was also actually looking at your website and I was reading the letter that you're talking about that you wrote to Sir Keir Starmer. If you don't mind, I might just put some extract from that into the
Sure,
podcast notes as well.
sure. That's absolutely fine. Thank you. It's
Thank
been
you.
a pleasure to
Thank you so
speak to
much.
you, Naveen. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Pleasure
Thanks a
completely
lot.
mine. Thank you so much. We'll keep in touch.